What's going on, everybody? Today is a very exciting day because, I get to speak with some cool people and, especially some cool vegan people who like to talk about health and all things vegan, all the great things that are amazing for not just your body, but also your mental. Today's guest is Kris, aka Krisdabronxvegan. How we doing today?
Hey, I'm good. Glad to be here.
Yes, definitely, happy to have you in, what we're going to be calling the vegan hot seat. We're going to be asking some interesting questions and hopefully you can teach us something that we can take away from this conversation and apply to our everyday life, right? So let's get to know you a little better. Since your name is Krisdabronxvegan, obviously, I'm going to assume that you were born and raised in the Bronx, right?
Yes, that's correct. I was born and raised in the Bronx.
Nice. So let's go a little deeper. Since you were born and raised in the Bronx, can you kind of paint the picture of what growing up as a child was like in the Bronx for you in terms of what did you eat?
Okay. Well, to be clear, a lot of folks, when we talk about the Bronx, they think about the South Bronx. I was not born and raised in the South Bronx. I was born and raised in the Northeast Bronx, so Co-op City. So if the audience knows where I'm from, that's where I'm from.
Okay, so big up Co-op City.
Yeah, big up Co-op. And my parents still live there, so...
Okay.
So what did I eat? I ate like a variety of different things. So I was around a lot of different cultures, primarily Caribbean cultures. Chinese food is like there in abundance. A lot of like Jamaican and also Dominican and Puerto Rican food.
Okay.
So it was a mix of things, which I loved.
Okay, nice. You mentioned, a lot of Chinese, restaurants being in the area. So would you say, just like everybody else from New York, you were eating, let's say, the fried chicken wings and all of these other things that, we all start off eating because that's what's placed in our neighborhood.
Yeah,
right?
For the most part. There was a lot of that. There was a lot of like the fried rice and like a whole bunch of different things. But like even like on the Caribbean side, we had like a lot of oxtail, a lot of curry, a lot of jerk and stuff like that. And then on more of the Hispanic side, like, I don't know, like maduros or plátanos and stuff like that. So like rice and beans and pernil and, so I was around all of that.
And then you went vegan, right? And then you went vegan. But before we get into the vegan side, let me ask you this question. Do you remember your last non-vegan meal?
Oh, man. I think it was actually chicken wings.
Okay, cool. So what made you decide to make that transition and that shift from eating your typical Chinese food, restaurant food, your typical oxtail from the Jamaican restaurants and your typical Hispanic food? Why did you say, you know what? I no longer think this is for me and I want to try eating non-animal based foods.
Okay. So it wasn't an exact jump from, say, for example, eating meat to being vegan. I actually had a place in between where I was vegetarian. Okay. So I went vegetarian and I actually did that. Gosh, I can't remember the year, but I wanted to do something different. So it was around this time. Okay. New Year's Eve kind of time. So I made the resolution. I was like, all right, let me try something different, just out of curiosity. And I just cut out meat. And to be clear, too, I wasn't a huge meat eater, so I didn't feel like I was missing anything. Also, wasn't like really an intentional dairy eater as well. So like cheese wasn't really my thing. I really didn't like milk, but I wasn't intentional about like, say, for example, if I'm like eating a muffin, like, is this dairy free or not? So back then I really wasn't like that, but I wasn't like, okay, let me have a glass of milk. That wasn't my thing at all. Okay. So I did the detox, and the detox was meant to just like reset your system. And so I loved it. Like I loved how I felt. I felt really light. I didn't feel bloated.
Do you remember the name of the detax? Or was it just, your regular detox? Okay.
Yeah.
No specific name.
It was a specific, I don't want to butcher their names, but there are two doctors that are very well known in the vegan space. I think it's called Food Heaven. Gosh, I can't remember the name.
Okay, we're gonna look it up. So Food Heaven.
Yeah.
Okay, we're gonna look it up.
They had at the time like a vegetarian reset plan that I had subscribed to. I actually bought one of their T-shirts too that I wear a lot. And yes, I felt good. I felt like free. I felt like lighter. I didn't feel super heavy. I felt more energized. And then from there, I would say about a couple of years after that, I decided to go vegan because I was just like, why not? Okay. Right? I wasn't an intentional dairy eater. And like eggs, I think was like the last thing that I gave up. And honestly, the smell started to get to me, the taste started to get to me. And then I really became very intentional about what I was putting in my recipes, like what I was cooking, and what I ate when I was outside. Okay. So.
Do you think that the transition from going from animal-based foods to vegetarian dishes, do you think that made it easier for you to kind of handle and maintain and sustain a vegan diet, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say yes. From transitioning from being a meat eater primarily to a more vegetarian diet and then to a vegan diet was definitely easier. Okay. Because I had the knowledge and I had the education from what I learned being a vegetarian. So with that detox, we had a lot of recipes. So I was exposed to a world that I knew was there but didn't know much about. So it was a much easier transition.
It's funny that you say that. So every time that I speak to somebody that is trying to go the vegan route, at least in a healthy way, right? They always say that they're able to explore foods in a different way that they never had before. And you would think that, like after eating the same animals, right? You have your beef, you have your chicken. We've been eating the same animals, and technically that's been limiting our exposure to food and even just flavors, right? Like when you are enhancing or at least, transitioning to whether it be vegetarian or veganism, the foods play an important fact, but I think what plays a bigger factor is the actual taste and the seasonings and the flavor behind it. So it seems like, when someone experiments with, vegetarian food or vegan food, they actually get to elevate their culinary experience. Would you say so? Okay.
Yes, I agree. So I think you do elevate your culinary experience. And what I like to say, when people are transitioning from, vegetarian to vegan or so forth, I always say it's so much abundance. So I like to think in that abundance mindset as opposed to lack, because what a lot of folks say is I can't eat this. I can't. Cheese.
They can't give up cheese.
Right. And cheese is a big one because a lot of people love cheese. But I like to think about it in an abundance mindset. I'm like, okay, so what else can I explore? So that can be mushrooms, different type of fruits that maybe I wasn't privy to, or different type of vegetables that I really didn't use or know that much about. Being a meat eater, I think a lot of what we see is you have your protein, which is your meat-based protein. You have your carbohydrate, and then maybe a green. So that's kind of the Western American diet, and at least in my industry, what we call the SAD diet, which is the standard American diet. It's just meat and potatoes.
Yo, that's for real, because it's crazy that the SAD unfortunately stands for Standard American Diet. Also, seasonal affective disorder, which we're about to get into,
gosh, yes.
Right? So I learned about seasonal affective disorder. So I was away at school, and this was my freshman year, and just everybody looked sad. Nobody wanted to leave their dorms or anything like that. And on campus, they plastered a whole bunch of memos and said, this is around the time where people start feeling like this, seasonal affective disorder. Yeah. And seasonal affective disorder is a real thing, but it becomes a bigger problem when we're also eating foods that make us sad too, right?
Absolutely.
So it's almost like a double whammy. And another thing that I'm always kind of just shocked at is, for the most part, Black and brown people are lactose intolerant, right? But we have given cheese this superior status where it has us in a chokehold, where we won't give it up, or where people are I can't give up cheese. Why can't you give up cheese, right? Is there something in cheese that we don't know about that's holding our people back? Is there crack in cheese? Some people say that, although like I'm trying to be funny, some people say that like cheese and sugar have the same addictive, chemicals that crack and other drugs do have, right? So it's a struggle for us, right?
It's definitely a struggle. And just to add to that, I think also cheese is very aesthetic, right? So when you think about culinary stuff, let's talk about pizza, right? When you pull a pizza apart, you see the cheese and it looks very appealing. When you have like I don't know, like pasta, it just enhances a flavor. So fat in general, right? This is just like a little tidbit. Fat in general allows you to have that flavor. So a lot of people want that flavor. So that's why you're using like your sour creams or your heavy milks or all these things so it can bring together the flavor in your culinary dish. So I feel like that's the part that like really gets people in a chokehold. And it's just like, ooh, I don't know if I can do without like my Parmesan cheese or like my mozzarella or like all these things.
See, and I never thought about it from an aesthetic, stance where it's like, yeah, that's true. Because when that baked ziti or that mac and cheese comes out the oven, I gotta see that string of cheese being pulled, or it's not it. So that is that's a good point. How long, if you remember this, how long have you been vegan for?
I would say I think about 5 to 6 years I've been vegan.
5 to 6 years. And what has your vegan journey done for you?
Like I said before, like that abundance mindset, it's made me even more curious. So stepping into like, a lot of folks ask me like, how did I become a chef? How did I like learn these different things? I've always naturally been very curious, and I've always wanted to know, okay, how can I do this? Or how can I create this for myself? And being a vegan, I'm just like, it's limitless. The options are literally limitless. Like, there's so many things like I can do with like chickpeas.
I was literally just about to say, you can turn chickpea into tuna fish sandwich, into scrambled eggs. You can keep it as chickpea. You can do so many variations.
Exactly. There's so much versatility with being vegan and being plant-based. And it's just like, the world is at my feet. And granted, okay, I'm not eating meat, but I don't feel like I'm really missing out on anything, because honestly, what's making, like a chicken or like a steak, like very appealing, is really like, at least how I feel, the seasonings. Like if you don't know how to season your vegetables, then yeah, of course, maybe you're not like, okay, let me have some, I don't know, Swiss chard or something, right? You're not so like excited about that. But I feel like I'm not really missing out on it. I can get that meat-like texture from mushrooms, for example, and still get more benefit and less taxation on my body, like in terms of digestion, right?
Why do you think people, when they hear vegan or when they hear plant-based, why do you think that they run away from, those terms, right? You mentioned a good point when you mentioned, the world is yours basically when you switch over to a vegan diet where you have a variety, you have so many options, you can do so many different things. But what is taking the world so long to realize, like, hey, you don't have to eat the same thing every day in order to hit those the macro and micro, the nutrients, those counts, like, is it because as humans we are looking at it differently, or is it just because we've been brainwashed for so long with our taste buds and what we come out the womb eating from a very young age, and it's more of an emotional thing than it is maybe, like, oh, I want to eat animals? Is it because every year for Christmas and Thanksgiving we've been doing this when we go to our family member's house, or is it something totally different?
Okay, so what I'm getting from this, what is holding us back from being plant-based or being vegan? Okay, so food is so connected, right? Before even getting to veganism, food is so connected to who we are, how we identify ourselves, our cultures, our habits, everything, down to like, the health of like us on the inside, or like if we exercise or not. And it's so connected to us. And I think veganism and even any change is scary. So I think there's a level of fear there, right? Because we're entering into a place of an unknown. So the question of how, right? So like I said, I'm happy about like figuring out how to do this. But some people maybe are not so much like that. Some people are like, okay, I don't know how, and it's kind of scary. So you're stepping into an unknown zone that could maybe make you a little stressed, maybe make you a little anxious. So that's one thing. And then if we think more like on a cultural level, and I know us as vegans may laugh at it, but seriously, when we're going to Thanksgiving dinner or when we're going to like a Christmas dinner and there's primarily meat-based products there, and then coming out to your family and telling them, I'm actually vegan, and they're like, okay, yeah, you're joking. Or like, okay, yeah, this is just a phase. And
they
it's
don't
like,
respect it.
No, like put some respect on my vegan name. Like seriously. So I think that's there too. So that familial pressure and then also connectedness to your family may be lacking because then maybe they don't know what exactly you're embarking on. So having to explain it and go through that, I think is also another level to it, and seeing how you fit in the world with being vegan. Like, am I an outsider now? Or, you know, I mean, some people may not think it's that big of a deal, but it really is. And I think that's what's holding people back from maybe making that type of change or any type of change, right? You have to be like, okay, if you have to be so fed up to the point that you're like, all right, I really want to change, or you try something, you're like, okay, maybe this is doable for me. So it's real deep. It could get real deep, but I think those are like,
and there is a connection with food, right? I see, sometimes I'm on Instagram and I see these videos of like, you know, parents giving their child a chicken wing, and the child, you know, having one bite, their brain just lights up and they're like, I want more. Like, what's in the chicken?
Okay, right. I don't know what is in the chicken. I have no idea. Why is the chicken so good? Maybe because it's crispy, it's crunchy, salty.
Have you seen the Jamie Foxx movie on Netflix, something about Tyrone?
I did not.
Okay. So there's a scene where they're at this chicken spot and everybody's eating the chicken. But they're noticing that everybody in the chicken spot is just laughing. Then they're like, what the hell is in this chicken? And they found out that the government was basically putting some sort of illegal substance in the chicken, and not only in chicken, but in products that a lot of Black people use, such as, you know, the hair grease, the pomade and stuff like that. So, you know, I wouldn't be shocked if one day, you know, we hear that like Tyson Foods, you know, put something, an addictive chemical in their chicken.
I wouldn't be surprised at all, because there is an odd attachment to meats, like chitlins, for example. I'm like, first of all, chitlins smell absolutely disgusting. What is the attachment to that?
So, I believe, and since we're bringing up chitlins, right? And I think that if we look back, these were the meals that were provided to the enslaved folks, right? Yeah. And I'm not too sure. So how I look at it, and, you know, people may get upset at me for saying this, but how I look at it is, by us still eating that way, we still have a low-key attachment to slavery, right? We aren't really removing our ties to that, and we're still eating the same way. But why? Because we're not enslaved in the same way anymore. So sometimes I think about that, and I think about those kind of, you know, not necessarily minor, but I think about those connections.
Those connections are real deep.
Yeah.
They're mental, they're tied to our ancestry, to our lineage. So there can be something deeply embedded that even still maybe we're not consciously aware of. Yep. And then also habits, right? So if your family was doing this back then, and then the next generation, generation, it's generational. So I can see that for sure.
I am definitely, in my family, I am definitely the odd person out. I'm the crazy guy, right? Because it's like, wait, this person came out of nowhere talking about, hey, let's try vegan food, right? And I think sometimes when you present it like that, it scares people, right? You know, let's try vegan food. And they're like, what the hell? You want me to try some drugs? And I'm like, no, like, let's try vegan food. But now how I approach it versus how I did then is, let's try food, right? Because I don't, like, vegan food isn't any different than regular food, right? And I think that people sometimes think too hard about what veganism is and what it means. So, you know, you can remove, if somebody has rice, beans, you know, plantains, and a steak on their plate, just simply removing the steak. Right. Now you have a vegan meal. You just add some vegetables to it and you have a vegan meal. And I think that sometimes maybe how veganism is introduced to people. Maybe that is what's holding them back, or that might be primarily what's scaring them.
I can definitely see that.
As a health coach, can we say that?
Yes.
As a health coach, as a nutrition coach, what are some myths that are out there that you kind of always laugh at, when people say, oh, I'm not supposed to eat this, or this is bad for you, or this is good for you?
Right. I'm very careful. So when it comes to like the do's and the don'ts of, let's say, health in general, right? I am very careful about saying, don't do this, don't do this, do this. So I keep it general. So my do's are like, do get enough sleep, or do drink enough water. So mostly like the positive, right? So drink enough water, eat your fruits and vegetables, exercise daily. And I try to turn it into like more of like a positive things. And those for me are like the general, right? And so when we get into the myths, right, about health, so you see like these fad diets, right? You'll see things like, it might upset some people here, but you see some things like, like keto or low carb diet or low this or no fat this. I feel like there's a function for each diet, but I feel like because of diet culture and the craze to either be skinny or to look a certain type of way takes over what the actual functionality of that diet may be.
Correct.
Right? So
everybody that I know that's tried keto just wants to lose weight.
Exactly, because you're tapping into your ketones to tap into your energy. You're not using glucose or carbohydrates as an energy source, which is appealing for some, but may not necessarily be beneficial for your arteries. So we have to be very careful when we prescribe or subscribe to a certain type of diet and really take a look at what we're going through. Right. So I'm like, even like with being vegan, let's talk about it. Like I'll talk to clients. I'm like, let's talk about it. Why do you want to do this? What is your motivation behind it? And a lot of times it is vanity. It is, I want to look a certain type of way. So that's okay. And then we'll dig a little deeper as we continue to go through, say, for example, your transformation. But, the low carbohydrate diet type of thing, I'm like, well, let's just talk about the science, right?
People are always talking about that, bread. Yeah. Oh, I don't want to eat bread because it's too much carbs. Is that a real thing? Does it matter? Does it depend on what kind of bread you're eating? Should people be leaning towards, does it matter the difference between white bread and wheat bread,
Okay, so there is a difference. And the answer to if it does matter about what carbohydrate you're using, if you're having a lot of carbs or not, the answer is it's kind of like a yes and no type of thing, right? So I like to start with the basics, right? So carbohydrates are your main source of energy. Those glucose, glucose is the building blocks of carbohydrates. So that's what's giving your cells energy, literally from your muscles to your brain, everything. You're getting energy primarily from glucose. So to deprive yourself of carbohydrates, you definitely have to do it in a way to where, say, for example, in the keto diet, you're tapping into ketones now to where you're getting energy from ketones. But because keto is, I would say, not necessarily sustainable, you're definitely going to recoil back. So there's that yo-yo effect.
And is that why folks in a keto diet, you can only do it for a limited amount of time and not a long time?
Right. Some folks do it for a limited amount of time. And if I have my science correct, keto diet was prescribed for people who had epileptic episodes, I believe. Okay. But we see what I mean here. It's now become a craze as to, okay, this is a great way for me to lose weight, build muscle, and all these things. And I'm like, there's another way to do it. There's another way to do it.
As a myth, I've noticed that, when talking to people about tofu or soy-based products, a lot of people always say soy is unhealthy. They always reference how for men, it will increase the estrogen and give males female boobs. Is this true?
That's so funny. I have not come across any male boobs in my day, so I'm not sure. Okay, no, that's just a joke. Okay, so there are a lot of different studies out there that have different opinions about what soy does for the body, right? So it can be estrogenic and it can be anti-estrogenic. And it could depend on, say, for example, we'll just take a female, what effect that's going to have on the body. And then I also think about like the cultural like connotation that comes with soy. So I think especially in our culture and like Black culture, brown culture, that soy is more frowned upon. And I think Dr. Sebi definitely has a strong impact on that because of his research on soy and its mass production. The fact that there is a high amount of sulfites in it. So sulfites does take the moisture and oxygen outside of your body, and that it also prevents the absorption of iron. So I think there's a general skepticism with soy. I personally haven't decided if it's great or not great for me. So that myth is definitely there. But the question that I always ask myself, and I think it comes to like wheat, for example, is very similar with this discussion, right? If I were in Asia, is that tofu or that soy product going to be better quality than it is in the States? So if we think about the production of soy, and soybean is mass produced, especially in America, in the United States. And then there are actually, I think the National Library came out with, I think it's the United States National Library, Library of Medicine, there we go, came out with a case that talked about soybeans and how much glyphosate was sprayed on soybeans.
I've heard about glyphosate and I've heard how a lot of the farmers or a lot of the manufacturers now are spraying a lot of, glyphosate on a lot of our crops and, vegetables and fruits. What is that? What is the glyphosate actually doing? Like, how is it harming us?
Okay. So glyphosate is also known as Roundup. And it's sprayed on crops. And I believe the purpose of spraying it on crop is to like extend the shelf life of it. And then also to prevent it from like growing it as like a mass crop. So if you have a lot of crops, you want to make sure that they're in good condition. So it's literally preserving the integrity of the crop.
When you say Roundup, you talking about the spray that I can go to Home Depot and purchase?
What I'm talking about.
So that's exactly what they're spraying on our food?
That's exactly what's being sprayed on our food.
No wonder why sometimes after I eat, my stomach is killing me. Yep. And I'm like, I didn't eat anything crazy. What's going on? So it might have been, okay.
So when we talk about processing, I think spraying of pesticides, herbicides, all these different things on our crops definitely comes into play because, like I said, when I think about wheat, in the US, wheat is so processed to a point that you're not getting the actual protein from wheat, and then therefore it's coming with a lot of sugars and it's messing up our insides, right? So the same thing with soy. Soy has been reported to have a high amount of glyphosate that's been sprayed on it. So what it does in our bodies is that glyphosate kills bacteria, right? We are primarily made up of microbes. I think Dr. Hyman came out with the statistic that we are about 96% bacteria and we're barely any human cells. So let's think about what glyphosate actually does to, say, for example, our gut flora. It's killing the bacteria because in essence, it is bacteria. So then it can cause a slew of different diseases, cancer, even though I think the EPA came out with the stat that actually glyphosate doesn't harm us, but it's very hard to believe because if glyphosate at its core is meant to rid of bacteria, we're primarily made of bacteria, and getting rid of that bacteria can also cause dysregulation in our system.
That's interesting. So let's say I go to the grocery store and I pick up, some fruits and some vegetables, right? if I come home and I wash the vegetables, with, let's say, baking soda, is that actually removing some of the pesticides and stuff that's being sprayed on our produce?
Okay, I think from a surface level, it does, but glyphosate is very pervasive. Glyphosate is not only in the crops, but also in our soil. So it's deeply embedded into these crops. So glyphosate is actually one of the, I believe, forever chemicals, hard to detox out of the body. So once you eat it,
it's there forever. It's there forever.
So there's definitely a product out there that can help you detox it, but it is very difficult to do so.
Okay. And clearly, the American manufacturers and the American, producers of crops are harming the American citizens because, as most of us, we don't know better, right? We're not even thinking that these crops are being sprayed with anything. We're going to the grocery store, we're purchasing our groceries, and we're just coming home and just eating it, right? Yeah. Not even understanding how this is affecting how we think, right? How we can, sometimes we make decisions and we're like, damn, why did I make this bad decision or a poor decision? But the foods that we eat enable us to make good and bad decisions, right? Okay.
Agree. And I think that comes into place with like the gut-brain axis. So if we are breaking down our gut, our microflora, then that axis in terms of brain fog, any type of mental disorders can definitely interrupt that.
I'm happy you said brain fog. I've probably told this story a bunch of times. So to everybody that's heard this story, I'm sorry. So one of the reasons why I decided to stop eating meat is because I felt as if that, one, I was feeling lethargic, right? And I felt that my brain was like very cloudy and foggy. And I can truly say that once I, switched up my eating and removed animal-based products, I can say, I don't want to sit here and say, my brain hasn't been foggy since, but I cannot recall one time within that 5-year period that I've been like, damn, my brain, I'm still feeling clouded and foggy. So definitely removing the animal-based products has helped. And then also just looking at not even just animal-based products, removing certain, not eating as much, candy and sugar and sweets as I used to, consume previously. Let's talk about gluten. A lot of times, I'll be in the supermarket and then I'll see, gluten-free, right? And I'll be honest with you, the gluten-free pasta tastes horrible, right? But it tastes different than the pasta that does have gluten. And for the people who may not be familiar with gluten and the different in what gluten actually is, can you please, give us a quick rundown of what gluten is?
Yeah, of course. So gluten is actually a protein that brings food structure and then also acts as a binder. So when you see bread and like when you open it up and you kind of see like, I wouldn't necessarily say fibrous, but it looks like it's like you can pull it together, you can see how it was stuck together. That's the gluten. That's what's keeping that bread together. So it's a binder. You can find it in wheat, rye, and barley, and then other things as well.
So is gluten bad for you? Why are there products that are gluten-free, right? Are there, I know that there are some people with specific health issues that actually cannot digest gluten. For them, I can understand, right? Mm-hmm. But should we be allowing gluten into our bodies to begin with? Okay,
so the question is, right, is gluten bad for us? And again, with soy, I'm a little like yes and no. And then it depends on what your function is.
Okay.
So let's consider the allergen effect, right? So there are those who are highly sensitive to gluten, which is celiac disease, an autoimmune disease, yes. Right? And then you have some who are gluten intolerant or gluten sensitive, which means that protein, generally that protein does not get broken down until it hits your small intestine. And so once it hits your small intestine, some people, it agitates them. So say, for example, myself, it does agitate me. So I prefer gluten-free options.
Okay.
And it acts as a prebiotic for your microflora. So for some folks, they can tolerate it. Their body can process it and everything's all good, no harm, no foul. But for others, it can be mildly severe or even more severe.
Are you familiar with the brand Dave's Killer Bread?
I am familiar.
Okay. I believe that the way they process their bread and everything, it's in a specific way to, I believe, like kind of remove a lot of the gluten, and so that people who do have sensitive, maybe stomachs can digest their bread. And me personally, I enjoy eating Dave's Killer Bread because after I eat that bread, I don't feel bloated or I don't feel crazy after. So if we're talking about gluten and we're talking about how some people can't digest it. I know that certain foods are not easily digestible for particular people. And sometimes what ends up happening is their insides of their bodies become inflamed, right? Yeah. And let's just say, I don't know what inflammation is. And, we have you here so you can break everything down for us. What is inflammation?
Okay, so inflammation, generally speaking, is the body's response to a pathogen.
Okay, and why do you say generally speaking?
I say generally speaking because once we get into like chronic inflammation, it gets a little bit more specific. Once we get into like autoimmune diseases, it gets a little bit more specific. Okay. So like if we, generally speaking, like I said, an immune function is to help you repair, right? So when you, for example, you cut yourself, right, and your body is healing itself, that's your immune response. Or when, for example, you get a fever, that's your body's response to something that is a little bit off, right? But when we get into more chronic inflammation, when we're moving from acute to subacute and now all the way up to something that can be degenerative or life-threatening, it's a little bit different.
Okay. So are there foods that someone can eat that reduces inflammation?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Okay. Anti-inflammatory foods, plenty. So, the first thing that comes to mind for me is blueberries, right? Blueberries are like a superfood. Okay. So, and then I also like to talk about things that are like red type of foods, right? So when I think of
red type of foods?
Red foods.
Red foods.
So like when I think of like beets, I think of watermelon, I think of pomegranate. So they're very high in like anti-inflammatory properties and also very good for your circulation system to kind of like get all of that gunk out so you can release it. So I think about those because they have like a huge bang for your buck. They bring more oxygen to your body. Say, for example, beets do. They bring a lot of oxygen to your body.
And these same foods that you're eating, if it's good for inflammation, then I'm assuming that by default, it also helps aid and improve gut health.
Oh yes, absolutely. Okay. Absolutely.
You and I were talking off camera, and I asked you, based on gut health, do these kombucha drinks actually work? So let me ask that question again here. Do kombucha drinks actually work?
I will say this, they could. But I think what takes away from the effectiveness of the kombucha drink is the amount of sugar that's present in those drinks. So there are brands that don't have that added sugar, and I think those can be beneficial for you absolutely as a fermented food that you're ingesting for your gut health. I think perfect, like no harm, no foul. But when I look at something, I look at it as a whole, and I don't get pulled into the marketing scheme of, this is a healthy health food drink. But if I'm looking to improve my gut health, yes, kombucha can be very important. But also, if I'm constantly drinking a sugary drink, then maybe I'm just giving myself too much sugar. I wouldn't necessarily say like diabetes is an issue, but when you drink it,
it's on the same path.
It's on the same path. You're trying to prevent drinking a lot of sugary drinks. So like no sodas, no juices and things like that. But when you do have like a kombucha drink with a lot of added sugar, it poses a problem.
Let's dial back a little bit because you're giving me some really, really good information. So I'm gonna get real personal. Okay. How you know all this? How you know all this? What's the secret? Like, did you go to school, to provide you with the education and the resources that you're able to speak fluently and confidently in any room about whether it's about veganism, whether it's about plant-based or health in general? Did you graduate from YouTube Academy? Because a lot of the information you're giving is really important, and an interview like this makes it easier for someone to be introduced to it. But if they want to continue their learning or just start off their education, how can they do that? What was your path?
Okay, so a lot of personal experience. So being transparent here, I have a sensitivity to certain carbohydrate change. So they're called FODMAPs. And so for me, I've had issues with like bloating or like cramping, and there's certain types of foods that just do not vibe well with me, right? So we'll just put it simply like that.
Even with you eating non-animal based foods,
Exactly.
There's still foods that affect you.
Exactly.
Okay.
So, and that goes into, just the point of saying like being vegan automatically means healthy. Not necessarily, right? Because what I say is everybody is different, right? So a lot of the things that I know I've learned from personal experience, and also because like I don't want to walk around with a bloated belly or with cramping, or it makes me irritable. Like I want to feel free. I want to feel free in my body. So I have done extensive research on these things, and also nutrition and health has been a huge part of my life. For instance, my mom was diagnosed with thyroid cancer, and her diagnosis, along with my sister's diagnosis, she had pseudotumor cerebri. And when I was...
I'm sorry. Okay. That was a really long word.
Yes.
Can you please repeat that word again?
Okay. My older sister, she had pseudotumor cerebri.
And what is that?
So it's not a real tumor, but for her, what happened, it put pressure behind her eyes. So she had... there was a possibility for her to go blind, and she also had a lot of headaches. And back when I was young, being the problem solver that I wanted to be, I wanted to be a neuroscientist. Obviously, that did not work out. I'm not a neuroscientist. I actually did poorly in those classes. But I always wanted to find a solution for my sister, and also for my mom. And through my mom's pathway, I learned a lot about adaptogenic herbs. I learned a lot about gluten. I learned a lot about soy.
Adaptogenic
herbs.
Adaptogenic herbs.
Yes.
What is that?
Okay, so some examples would be like maca, rhodiola, would be like ashwagandha.
I'm familiar with maca root powder.
Yes.
I'm familiar with ashwagandha because I take this pill every morning. It's magnesium and ashwagandha mixed. You feel me?
I love that.
So all of these herbs are designed for
mood.
Okay.
Mood, energy, and there's also a lot of other different benefits, including cognitive function.
So when we say mood, right? If I go to a doctor and I tell them that I've been in this specific mood, they may prescribe me with, some pills, right? Versus if I go to, let's say, a holistic, specialist, they may say, hey, take this instead or take that. Obviously, we understand the pill business is a big $1 trillion business, but are these herbs proven to help mood?
Okay. Well, you have things like Ayurveda. You have traditional Chinese medicine that have studied extensively, along with African American herbalism, along with so many different other like cultures who are based in the land who have studied these herbs. So yes, they do work. There is definitely some skepticism in, I would say, more of Western culture, because it, at least in my opinion, is more contradictory to Big Pharma.
Yeah.
So there's definitely science or cultural backing to these herbs.
So you were speaking about your sister. You were speaking about you wanting to solve the problem that she was going through, that she was suffering with, as well as your mother. And this is what primarily led you to doing extensive research.
Yes, exactly.
Any schooling in this?
Yeah.
Okay.
So Actually, in my college years, I didn't do health education or nutrition education, but I'm currently pursuing my master's right now to get my certified nutrition specialist degree.
Okay.
And so that is also like opening me up to more of what I already know. And honestly, it all started with just like self-study. So, and I really just wanted to know. And when I talk to people, I want to give them facts. I want to be accurate. And then I also want to feel like my best self. So that's primarily what I do as a health supportive chef. And then also as a nutritionist, nutrition coach right now. Okay. And I help people be their best selves. So that what that means, at least for me, is freedom in my body, freedom to move, not constrained in my mind, no brain fog, having energy. Yep. I want to be like, I want to go. Like that's that's kind of me.
And you said something interesting earlier when you were talking about bloating, right? Yes. Why is it that it seems to be more women suffer from the side effects of feeling bloated than men, right? And even if we eat the same foods, you hear often a lot of women, I'm not going to say complaining, right? A lot of women noticing maybe just that bloated feeling and nobody likes feeling bloated, so I get it. But does gut health and the foods we eat affect men and women differently?
Ooh, that is a really good question. There are some studies exploring that. And so what the studies are doing is observing the microflora and the microbiome in women and men in regards to specific conditions and comparing them and seeing like, okay, is there not enough of this type of bacteria or is there too much of this bacteria? But what I think is prevalent, and there are a few things, right? Most people, men and women, don't know that they're bloated until they're not bloated. That's the first thing, right? And then most women who are dealing with hormonal changes, they do experience that bloat, they experience that cramping. So it's more familiar for them because we go through that cycle every month. And I feel like, I don't know, with men, I feel like maybe it's just like a guy thing. It's like, I know a lot of guys are like, they're out there, they're like in the streets, no, they're like doing whatever, right? So maybe there's not really that much of awareness or attention to what actually is going on the inside. And that's just my assumption. But yeah, so I think there's definitely, I feel like it's more of an awareness for women, and also in our culture, we're also like, we want to look good, we want to feel good, and so
flat
I feel
tummy
like,
tea,
exactly, flat tummy tea. That's a whole nother. But so it's more of, I feel like for women, it's definitely more of an awareness. There. Okay. Yeah.
Speaking of awareness, just something I've noticed while on social media, a lot of women are suffering from something that I've never heard before, but it seems to be something that is taking women by storm, and it is PCOS as well as PMDD. Let's start off with PCOS first. What does PCOS stand for, and what does it actually do?
So what does PCOS stand for? So PCOS is polycystic ovarian syndrome, and it's when women have, say, for example, like a high amount of male hormones, could have a high amount of male hormones in their system, androgens specifically causing them to have like facial hair. Insulin resistance is also involved with this, which could lead to metabolic diseases, like, say, example, for prediabetes or diabetes. And so women are experiencing overgrowths of cysts in their reproductive areas because of this imbalance hormonally. Okay.
And how can food, specifically a vegan diet, assist and aid in maybe reducing some of those symptoms?
Yeah. That's a really good question. So how can vegan foods or plant-based foods reduce those symptoms? The first thing that comes to mind to me is fiber. And I love fiber for a various amount of reasons. So what fiber does is that it binds to the hormone. And when you are passing or going to the bathroom, it can take out the excess amount of, say, for example, estrogen, and it can cause more balance in your system. So where is fiber? Fiber is prevalent in plant-based foods, which is why a lot of folks say your answers to your problems can be found in changing your diet. So the amount of fiber that you're intaking, and especially around the time of your menstrual cycle, it can help you balance out those hormones. So I believe it's called lignans, and they are found in lentils and beans, and tons of fiber in there that can connect to those hormones and pull them out.
Okay. And as you just mentioned, lentils and beans, maybe what are some other foods that are rich in fiber?
So there are fruits. So things like avocado has a good amount of fiber. Cantaloupe or melons have great amount of fiber. Raspberries have great amount of fiber, and it's also very great for women for their uterine health. So raspberries, awesome. What else?
You hear that, ladies? Raspberries. Raspberries on deck. Okay.
Raspberries, raspberry leaf tea.
Okay.
Perfect.
Okay.
Yeah.
And as we're mentioning PCOS, there's something else that women are suffering from called PMDD. What does that stand for?
So that's premenstrual dysphoric disorder. And that's also just women experiencing these PMS symptoms for an extended period of time. So, and to be transparent, I actually deal with PMDD. So for about 2 weeks in my luteal phase, before I have my menstrual cycle, I experience high amounts of bloating, mood swings, maybe sometimes signs of depression or anxiety, and just overall just not feeling great. And those are the symptoms primarily of PMDD.
Okay. And not knowing much about either disorder, is this something that you develop or are you born with it? And the reason why I'm asking is, are there any links to women in PCOS, to their gut, to what they were eating? Are there any links to what caused this disorder?
Yeah, so I definitely think there are links between the disorders and between PCOS and PMDD, for sure. When we talk about your microflora, right, there are things that contribute to your microflora all the way from where you're born, if you were breastfed, bottle fed, where you live, your diet, and then also your movement. So there's a lot of things that are affecting your microflora. And so from birth, maybe you didn't have the amount of microflora. There's a lot of different factors that come into it. And then also, if you just recently changed your diet, your microflora is going to also change. But what I can say about diet and PCOS and PMDD is that it's mostly suggested to take on a plant-based diet, to take on things that are more high in fiber, to eliminate, say, for example, dairy and cheese that can cause more inflammation, caffeine as well that can cause more inflammation and pull oxygen out of the body.
So if we're talking about, so for PCOS, right?
Yeah.
You mentioned cysts, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So are we saying that this is an inflammatory disorder?
Oof.
Would we say that or no?
I wouldn't necessarily say that, but I would say that the inflammation is a huge contributor.
Okay.
So just as I'm not a medical doctor, but as someone who does study food, inflammatory foods can contribute and worsen things that are already going on. So let's say, for example, the insulin resistance, right? And if you're drinking and eating foods high in sugar, high in saturated fats, high in trans fats, that can make you more prone to, say, for example, pre-diabetes or diabetes. So, and that's something to consider, right? So our lifestyle choices as a nutritionist, our lifestyle choices include things like your diet and how can my diet either help or harm what I'm going through. And I think it's a huge contributor because we're ingesting. When we ingest, we are doing it so that we can get the nutrients and then let it go, right? But when we are passing, part of that passing process is also pulling things out so that it doesn't recirculate into our circulatory system. So I can say as a nutritionist, I think that diet, food choices, along with other things, contribute heavily to something that you're dealing with.
So we've been talking about how gut health impacts women, but how does gut health impact men, right?
Okay, as you know, gut health is pretty much everything, right? The digestive system and all the systems work pretty much together. So for men, let's think about the circulatory system, for example, right? And if you are eating, like I said before, foods high in saturated trans fats, or your cholesterol is high, right? The plaque that starts to build up in your arteries could also prevent the flow, right? So if you understand what I'm saying, then that can also contribute to, say, for example, erectile dysfunction.
Is that why the joke with vegan men being able to have an erection for longer periods of time? And I believe there was a study in, it might have been a Netflix, was it the What the Health documentary where Game Changers. Basically, they measured the erection when a man was on a plant-based diet versus his erections when he was just eating whatever.
Interesting.
And they noticed his erection was happening first in the morning, but he was also erect for longer periods of time on the plant-based diet versus the non-plant-based diet.
I'm sure that's true because honestly, when you're eating like standard American diet, the SAD diet, you are getting higher amounts of, say, for example, cholesterol, and it's not beneficial to your circulatory system. So when you do need that blood flow, it may not necessarily be there or as strong as it could be, say, if you were on a plant-based diet. So
let's help the fellas out there, right? What are some foods that can kind of help them out in those situations, right? So and maybe it's a superfood as well. We spoke about maca root, right?
Yeah.
I believe maca root is, good for a flurry of things,
right? Yes, it is.
But also alleviating, maybe erectile dysfunction. Are there any foods, because it seems like the cholesterol is the issue that's aiding in, ED, right? So are there any foods that help reduce cholesterol?
Oh, foods that help reduce cholesterol. I mentioned avocado. So you want things that are healthy fats, right? And I know we're plant-based and we're vegan. So for those who are non-vegan, I don't endorse really salmon. If you can go out and catch the salmon yourself, and so foods that have healthy fatty acids, and what comes to mind to me is avocado. But going even further and just beyond the cholesterol too, so foods that are beneficial for men, watermelon. Seeded watermelon specifically. And the watermelon rind does definitely help with ED and circulation, and also beets. Because they bring, like I said, for example, that oxygen flow. But if you're looking for more like energy and libido, definitely maca root is great. Maca root. And I think another one is Tunkat Ali. That one is, I don't know if it's the same as horny goatweed. I'm not sure. But there are definitely herbs out there that can help you with your libido.
Nice. So, when those late night commercials are running, asking men, hey, do you have ED issues? Let's not resort to the pills and everything first. There are particular herbs out there that might be able to maybe not cure, but maybe treat some of the side effects that you're
absolutely. And I do want to get to the root though, right? Because when we think about foods beyond just a medical perspective, when we think about foods give us energy, right? Life source. They can give us life source. And so then therefore also give us vitality, right? So when we have vitality, we have a zest for life, we have a zest for sex, we have a zest for food. So overall, from just a general and kind of like holistic perspective, doing a plant-based diet, eating live foods can definitely help bring you that vitality. And something that I also say is food is fuel, right? So you can use it to your advantage or to your disadvantage. So if you just take it from that perspective and you maybe don't want to get so deep into the details, endorse a plant-based diet and see what that live food action can bring to you.
Wow, we talked a lot, we talked a lot about some really good things, and if there's anybody that is looking for some additional information or looking for some nutrition or health coaching, how can they find you?
Right now, primarily, you can find me on my Instagram page, Krisdabronxvegan. That's KRISDA Bronx Vegan. And just shoot me a DM and we can work something out in terms of your consultation and what you're looking forward to doing.
Awesome. Well, my saying, y'all know I love all things vegan. And, Kris, I definitely appreciate the conversation and the education and the resource and all the knowledge you provided, during this chat. And if you want to continue to hear more conversations like this, tap in with your boy, Eating Vegan with Nick. Also, tap in with Krisdabronxvegan. Let's get it.